The spring anime season has started, and we here at the Roommate Review have been eagerly awaiting the anime adaptation of To Your Eternity. This will be episode 1 of a new series where we choose an anime and follow it week to week, pointing out differences between the anime and manga, giving our impressions, and wrapping it all up in a neat summary binding the sporadic and at times conflicting opinions of the Roommate Review crew into a digestible narrative. If we succeed, go ahead and hit that like button. But more importantly, I hope you take the time now to sit back, relax, and enjoy the show as we take you through episode 1 of To Your Eternity. The episode starts as the man in black casts a sphere unto the world. The anime uses angles and implies a velocity as if he'd flung it. The manga shows the orb's descent onto the lands, making contact with the rock to give us an earlier impression of the landscape. The anime instead shows a harder collision against the rock, making for the first contact, which seems to trigger the sphere into replicating the rock for an unspecified but lengthy amount of time. The sphere replicating the rock eventually leads to the rock replicating the moss, before we finally reach the moss replicating the dog, Joan. We then get a brief look at the snow-barren landscape, which is nice, before we continue following the ever-changing perspective of our cozy anime thing-esque shapeshifter. This episode follows the manga quite closely, but there are some interesting choices made in adaptation. The rock, which Joan rests its head on when passing, isn't visible in manga form. While one version implies the time that the north has been snowy, the anime chooses visual clarity. The following wobble and bark are those little additions that really sell the scene. As for Joan's terminal wound, perspective of the wound has changed from a slightly off look to show the chunk that had been slashed visible along its silhouette. The anime visualized it head on, with depth created through deep reds. Our shapeshifter dissipates the wound among slightly varying jump cuts, like a handheld quality montage focusing on the digital effect. In the manga, the wound closes over itself in a stringy yet understated way we'll see in a later episode. There's a quick moment of reflection that Joan left the settlement months ago and couldn't make it home. It could be foreshadowing, as without our shapeshifter, no one would have made it back. The anime cuts to coverage of the wrecked settlement as Joan creeps in, triggering the woodblock chimes the boy has set up around his home. The settlement is emphasized more here than in the manga, and is shown in a wider, more expanded way than the source. Instead of exclusively emphasizing the lone home of the boy, we will always see the other homes that he's had to strip for materials. Most of these panning shots are at night, emphasizing the use of deep blues to convey the blanket of darkness. The boy welcomes Joan, and we skip him carrying the massive wolf inside. The stuffed bear here also looks a little too perfect. I mean, look at it. It's just unsettling. The boy conveys that the species, known as the horn deer, are all gone, thinking that their absence is the cause of Joan not eating. In the morning, we see he's salvaging wood from the other houses. He soon begins regaling Joan with the daydreams he's crafted over the years of fruit, likening them to fish. This boy has been having a bad time alone, surviving long after his duty of tending to the elderly that couldn't have made the exodus to the mountains. The anime cuts a few scenes taking place before this, showing the boy waking up, remarking that he's low on kindling, and trying, once again unsuccessfully, to feed Joan. Another notable difference is that in the manga, distant locations are implied through an absent horizon line, while the anime uses deep blues to convey a distant object. After mourning the 4 deceased older members of his clan, the boy rushes to the sound of his wood chimes with hopes that someone has returned. In the anime, the interior is darker, and the voice actor is tasked to share the boy's disappointment in a sigh. We pull back to show what the smiling boy would look like to someone who was in the house, where the manga shows a close-up as he turns to follow the fishing line. We skip a panel from the perspective of inside the water, with a fish swimming in circles, which is no real big loss. It gave time to reflect on the boy's process, with it being another moment of loneliness and survival. For the anime's sake, the snappy cuts do well to rather focus on how he bounces back, perhaps just to share his best self with his dog. This bounce back will follow a rule of threes, and each will provide an infusion of comedy to the otherwise depressing atmosphere, like a breath of fresh air. Then we have one of the tinier differences, as the boy teaches the dog to eat, and the dog speaks back to him before returning to his meal. Returning to chowing on the fish head is a slight deviation from the manga, but it plays less awkward and prolonged than it seems to in manga form. There, they sort of stare at each other until cutting to exterior coverage. Again, the exterior town at night is expanded and wider in the anime. The scene settles us into a minute or two of silence, holding to natural sounds, fading as the boy relaxes to the mural of his community. The anime and manga are joined in montage, and once again we see deep blues used for distance as they leave the settlement. They walk a day to the first marking stones. What we lose in panel coverage we more than make up for with brilliant warmth in the skies, and the hopefulness of the boy's discovery is sort of undercut when featured in 2 shots and not multiple panels, which to me plays very well given the barren reality he's confronting. The anime lines up shot for shot with the manga in montage across 4 more days of travel. Much like the disappointing fish, when the boy falls through the ice, we're given a musical lead-up, and then silence and natural sounds as the boy tries to cover with optimism. 2 of 3. However, our comical breather gets cut short as the boy realizes he's injured his leg as we cut to commercial. We return to the boy tending to his wound as he continues talking to the dog Joan. While these conversations would seem wholesome in their depictions of boyhood friendship with a dog, they can't help but feel more foreboding to the boy's sanity here, because we, as the viewer, know for a fact that the dog does not comprehend anything the boy is saying. There's a quick note on the blizzard snowdrifts that cover their camp, putting an end to the scene, whereas the manga transitions to day 6 as he speaks in determination. We then get shown the boy traversing through the terrible weather conditions in front of him, being pushed endlessly by his hopes that his family is waiting for him beyond the mountains. His body has started to fail, but his optimism carries him forward with the promise of a happier life, until he finds the wreckage of his family's caravan. At first, it looks as if the boy is broken, coming to grips with the idea that his whole family had died no more than 2 weeks after leaving. But instead, we get our third instance of the boy's optimism springing into action, finding the bright side, pointing out that this means they're heading the right direction. But rather than lighten the mood, it simply creates the contrast to really drive home how helpless the situation is as the boy finally breaks down. As the boy's voice breaks during his tired defeat, now seems like a good time to shout out Reiji Kawashima, the boy's voice actor. This is his first voice actor credit, but he delivers the boy's hopeless cries to great effect. He may be a newcomer, but his post-secondary education has been focused on music and voice acting, giving him an impressive and evident amount of control. We won't hear him sound like this for quite a while, perhaps not again depending on how he plays the it in the boy's form. I'll be looking forward to his performance as Ricky and Patrick in Shadow's house. We return to montage, which began hopeful and overproduced, but now it's slower and darker, swelling through the boy's breakdown and decision to hike 8 days home through a blizzard on a wounded leg. There's slightly more coverage of the dog urging the boy along. This may be the first helpful bit of agency Joan has shown since first shapeshifting into the dog to return home at all. Both anime and manga are glad to gloss over the return trip in favor of the scenes to come. The boy spends his time back home mourning the loss of his family and accepting his failure of escaping his dead village. Before long, though, he imagines trying again once he's healed. However, it becomes painfully obvious that he's not going to get better, and in silence, he helps himself onto his chair. It's another example of using one shot instead of referring to the multiple that the manga has to. The boy digs deep for one last bit of optimism as he dresses himself in his tomb, in hopes that his family will find him well dressed upon their return. As the boy finally passes away, Joan suddenly reacts to the death, now transforming into the boy, as the boy sees what he dreamed of for so long, and this scene mimics the source material verbatim. The Man in Black informs us that for our shapeshifter to change, it requires stimulation of some kind. With that in mind, our main character sets off on a journey to find more and more stimulation. I would be remiss to not point out that our episode ends with the fantastic musical stylings of Utada Hikaru launching us off onto our journey. This episode spans 80 pages of manga material, only skipping maybe 2 pages total of content that's not entirely needed. Thank you guys so much for watching. This video was written by both myself and my roommate review colleague Porifera. If you watched this and you enjoyed the sweet, sultry sound of my voice, you can get more of that in abundance over on my gaming channel. Link in the description below. Also, Porifera has more manga content in the works, and those will be uploaded right here on the Roommate Review. So stay tuned and make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the new content coming your way. But until then, I'll catch y'all next time. Ciao for now.